Okay, good question. Doesn't it look as though maybe the world's been through this kind of swings in temperature in the past, judging from this? I mean, what this is mapping out for us, in part, is ice ages, right? You've got periods of time when it's much colder down here and lower CO2 concentrations, and then it warms up. And in fact, this ascent right here at the end is the end of the last ice age, right? Which is what we've been talking about in the course. All of this domestication of agriculture and this flourishing of cities and the growth of the modern world has all taken place in this little piece at the very end here where temperatures, I promise I'm going to get a new battery today. This thing right here. The entire story of the rise of domesticated agriculture and modern civilization happens in that little spot with nice warmer temperatures. Now, on the one hand, you're right. The world has gone through temperature swings forever, and that shouldn't surprise us. The thing that's different is that we're not seeing what we're experiencing right now. It's not like we were here, and global warming is causing it to go up here. We already were here. We already were in a warm period, and global warming is going up above this range here, right? To get to a point in the Earth's history when temperatures were as high as they are now, if you go back in time, you say, I want to go until I find a time when the Earth was this warm, as it is now, and when CO2 concentrations were as high as they are now. How far back do you have to go? It's about 3.5 million years to get to a time when it was this warm, again, or previously. So what we're seeing now, yeah, climate changes, no question about it, over these kinds of timescales. But what's happening now actually is extraordinary compared to anything in the last 3.5 million years. Yeah? Will we go into another ice age in the next 50 to 100,000 years? There's every reason to believe that we would in the absence of fossil fuel burning and the changing. Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, there was actually a point in the 70s when the scientists of the world were worried that we were about to go back into an ice age, that we were sort of due to go back into an ice age because we'd had as long as you could expect from a nice warm interglacial. And they actually wrote the president and tried to get him agitated concerned about this. It was President Nixon. But it was only about that very same time that it became clear that, in fact, the forcing from fossil fuel burning and CO2 emitted into the atmosphere might override the onset of another ice age and, in fact, might drive the system in the other direction. So it's not clear. I mean, given the things that we believe cause ice ages, yes, the world ought to be expected to go into another ice age. But the CO2 in the atmosphere is now much higher due to things that humans have done, so we don't know whether that will actually happen. Okay. So let's talk about the Arctic again in relation to this in terms of these commercial interests. This is a map from that New York Times article 5 years ago depicting potential routes for shipping through the Arctic if it were to be free of ice for significant periods of time every year. So the key thing here is that the value of these routes is determined relative to the value of the alternatives, right? Which is to say, the opportunity to ship goods through the Arctic is only as attractive as it is faster than shipping them some other way, right? And so down here in the lower right, if you're trying to make your way from Tokyo to London with a tanker full of some good, and you have to go through the Suez Canal, which is to say you start in Tokyo and you go south around India and then up through the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean and get to London that way, you're talking about 13,000 miles that you have to travel. But if you can go through the North Sea, it's only, I think that's 6,000 miles. So it's less than half as far if you can go through the Arctic Sea. Similarly down here, if you decide to go the other way through the Panama Canal compared to the Northwest Passage, the difference again is about half. 15,000 miles through the Panama Canal, 8,600 miles, 8,500 miles through the Northwest Passage. Are there any questions about this? This is overlaid again with estimated sea ice extent. 5 years ago, we thought that it would retreat to that white area in the middle only by 2070. And now we're saying the best guess is more like 2030, maybe 2050 at the outside. There may not be any ice at that point. What else is on this map? The dark areas, if you look in the upper right, the dark sort of orange blotches are areas of known and prospective oil and gas reserves. You can see enormous amounts in the Barents Sea above Scandinavia, a great deal in northern Russia, and also northern Canada and Alaska. We already tap into some of those oil reserves around Barrow. Now, again, the issue, that's what the issue is, right? There's a lot of valuable resources that are now available that hadn't been before. So that and the shipping are the principal commercial issues at stake here. This is just a blow-up of that middle part. Again, those estimates have already been revised. There are about 150,000 Inuit, Eskimos, who live in North America or in the Arctic above North America. These were discussed in this article from the New York Times. These are people who are very much threatened by the changing temperatures, both directly and indirectly, right? Directly, they're threatened because most of them make their livelihoods from largely the fish and the wildlife. And those livelihoods are imperiled as these animals, organisms either lose their habitat altogether or their habitat moves and they are no longer where they used to be, right? Some of the most compelling stories about actually observed climate change come from these Eskimos living in the Arctic. They're also indirectly threatened, and that's what this woman who's a leader of the Inuit is talking about when she's talking to the New York Times. As long as it's ice, nobody cares except us, because we hunt and fish and travel on that ice. However, the minute it starts to thaw and becomes water, then the whole world is interested. And they are trying to assert themselves, demanding both action with respect to climate change and also a seat at the table in these negotiations over oil and gas concessions and road building and shipping and infrastructure for harbors and that sort of thing. As of 5 years ago, these were the investments that had already been made, according to the New York Times. A lot of shipping companies were investing in double-ended tanker ships, which is to say, why do you need a double-ended tanker ship to go through the Arctic Sea? Any idea? Yeah. If you get stuck in the ice, you can turn around without having to turn around. Exactly. You can throw it in reverse, and I mean these boats are even if the ice melts, you still have to be prepared to deal with floating bits and pieces, chunks that can be quite large of this ice. Maybe not iceberg size, right? Because these aren't necessarily pieces that have dropped off of glaciers. We're still talking about a layer of ice that might be anywhere from 3 feet to 15 feet thick. If you get trapped in such a bunch of ice, you don't want to have to turn around and put your bow in the other direction. You want to just be able to back out. Norway has put $8.8 billion into natural gas exploration and development. Russia has put in roughly 2 to 2.5 times that. Oil is expected to be still a greater opportunity than natural gas. Canada was putting $60 million into developing a shipping route through Churchill, Manitoba. There was a funny interview with a man, actually an American man, who had bought a big piece of land in Churchill, the old port, for like $1 because no one had thought it was going to be worth anything, and he was rapidly preparing to invest in creating the infrastructure needed to actually expand and put in a modern shipping facility at Churchill. Fishing, shipping, military research, there's a lot of activity in the Arctic now that wasn't going on previously. Here are those routes. Oh, now you can read them. Okay, territoriality and sovereignty then. How is this going to get resolved? This is actually a point of active diplomatic maneuvering right now. This is a depiction of what countries have now under the current framework of international law pertaining to offshore lands or open sea territorial waters, right? So the red shaded area in the middle is sort of what's up for grabs. It's not clear who has what kinds of claims in these areas. Who heard what Russia did a couple years ago? What did they do? They sent a submarine to the North Pole and they planted a Russian flag on the North Pole under the water of the Arctic Sea. I mean, this is the kind of thing it takes, or once upon a time, this was the kind of thing that signified to the world that you had staked a claim, literally staked a flag. I mean, if you go back and read this, it's the same kind of thing that Columbus did, right? Somehow Europeans got this notion in their head that if you land someplace and you want it, you just put a flag up. And that's somehow, I mean, if only it were that simple. But nonetheless, it still carries enough significance, symbolic or otherwise, that the Soviet or the Russians felt that this was a worthwhile use of their time. All right. So generally, as I said before, coastal countries control the sea. It says here 230 miles from their shores. That might be that's 230 miles like we normally think of them. I think that's 200 nautical miles, as in the previous slide that mentioned this. Like the U.S. controlled area here. So the areas behind these black lines roughly indicate where each country has sort of established claims, right? And again, the reason Denmark is involved is because Denmark is technically the sovereign of Greenland. The area of the hatch, the sort of diagonal stripes, not currently part of any country. Nations can make claims in the area, which must then be approved by the United Nations. Anybody know the basis on which a country can make a claim beyond 200 nautical miles from their shore? What do you have to do? Okay, you're right. The next paragraph there explains it. Must be proven that underwater ridges here are part of a continental shelf rather than a separate feature of the seafloor. So literally, this is like tectonic plates matter, right? And there are people, including the U.S., who are actively mapping the seafloor in the Arctic to try to figure out exactly how far out their continental shelf sticks. Right? Generally speaking, you get to the ocean, you go off the edge, you're on the continental shelf for some distance, and then you're no longer on the continental shelf, and the ocean gets a lot deeper. Well, it turns out that you can, under the current framework, you can assert claims further away if you can find a ridge that appears to connect you to connect that piece of open sea underwater to your continent. Now, that leaves still this area in the middle that people are trying to figure out what to do with. And suddenly it's no longer good enough just to say, oh, it's international waters. Right? That would be the default position, except that leaves all these oil and gas reserves unassigned, so to speak. Right? It becomes extremely attractive for different countries to assert claims over those areas. So here's one method. The median line method would divide the sea into areas proportional to the amount of coastline that each country has. So you map the coastline and you add up the total and divide by each country's share, and then you draw a line, draw a bunch of lines through the Arctic Sea and divvy it up accordingly, which would of course give Russia an enormous amount of the Arctic Sea because it's got an enormous coastline. There's also a sector method being proposed in which you divide it along lines of latitude up to the North Pole, in which case how complicated your coastline is no longer so important, right? A complicated coastline would give you lots of coastline and therefore more land or more sea under the previous method. Here it would just be straight divvying it up according to lines of longitude. Anybody been to the polar bear cam? This is the other big player, actually, believe it or not. The oil and gas are enormously valuable and attracting a lot of attention, and there's no question. I mean, at the end of the day, this is perhaps the sickest part of it all, is that global warming is creating business opportunities for oil companies, right? It's enabling us access, giving us access to huge amounts of fossil fuels that we otherwise wouldn't be able to get to, and that will only make it more certain that global warming continues, right? If there's another major player at the table, economically speaking, it's actually probably going to be tourism. I mean, apart from just simple environmental activism. And this kind of thing, any thoughts about polar bears? How many of you really feel like the polar bear has some kind of moral claim on us that makes you want to act, makes you more agitated, yeah? It's been your favorite animal forever. Excellent. How many of you feel like the polar bear is cool, but it's really just not that big a deal compared to everything else that's going on with global warming? No, come on, you got to have it. You? One, two. So now we got two people who, how many of you think polar bears just aren't cool at all and you don't want to have anything to do with them? All right, I'm not getting any votes here, folks. I just find it interesting because there are, it appears, quite a few people for whom this polar bear is the thing that's going to make them care, right? Or it's going to make them care in a way that otherwise they would not about these issues. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the polar bear matters from an ecological point of view for you as a keystone species, so to speak, and has ramifying implications for the larger ecosystem, rather than just because it's charismatic and it's big. Okay. Their cuteness might save them. I mean, I think it's very interesting that first thing it's interesting that you can pay money and go take a ride in one of these buses, the Tundra buggy. It's also worth noticing that they don't let you get anywhere near those polar bears when you ride in the Tundra buggy, right? Polar bears are perhaps the most aggressive predator on man that still exists in this world. I mean, polar bears will actually hunt humans, which is simply not true of pretty much anything else, right? Nonetheless, they are very cute, and they also are genuinely threatened by this. And so if you want to see a polar bear, you probably ought to book your ticket on the Tundra buggy sooner rather than later, because things don't look good up there, okay? All right, that's it. We're done for the day. We will see you next week.